I'm sure we'll have people trickling in, but we'll go ahead and get started so we have time for all of the great content tonight. Thank you for coming. My name is Megan. I'm a librarian here at the Santa Clara City Library. We wanted to first off start by saying thank you to the California State Library for sponsoring this program. As you may know, the California State Library partnered with the California State Parks last year to give free California state parks passes to every public library in the state. And to go along with that program, we also applied for a grant to do programming around the outdoors and nature and getting people excited to go outside and engage with their natural environment. So hopefully that's what this program will do tonight. So thank you to the California State Library. Our presenter is going to be Dr. Virginia Matzek from the Santa Clara University. And so she'll be doing our talk tonight. If you have any questions throughout the program, we're definitely going to answer questions at the end. So please just pop those into the Q&A as you think about them, and we'll get to your questions at the end. This this presentation will be recorded. So starting Monday, you'll be able to access it on our YouTube channel if you want to refer back to anything that's in Dr. Matzek's presentation. And I think that's all the information I have for you. So I'm going to hand it over to what you're actually here to see and let Virginia take it from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. It's such a pleasure to be here again. And I'm talking about something that's very close to my heart because I'm a restoration ecologist. And I actually did not train to do that as a college student. I was a political science major, and I got really interested in restoration from doing the very thing that I'm going to recommend to all of you, which is to go out and work on wildland weeds and put in some time in nature, helping control invasive plants in our wildlands. So this goes very deep for me, this kind of lecture. I'll share my screen here. Thumbs up, can you see that? Okay, so I titled this Open Space Invaders, just to hark back to the 80s for you, those of you who go back that far. But I had another title in mind, which was Invasion of the Habitat Snatchers, because part of what we're worried about with invasives, especially invasive plants, is that they take over natural habitats and then they change them. Either they the potential to drive some species to extinction or to be very rare, or just to kind of homogenize ecosystems so that we don't recognize them anymore. We don't recognize the kind of unique character that they have because they look like every other weedy place. And what you're seeing here, these kind of weird shapes, are trees in the south that have been overgrown by kudzu. So kudzu is an invasive species that many people have heard of. It's sometimes called the mile-a-minute plant because of its incredibly fast growth rate. Or the vine that ate the South because of all of these, like anything that stands still for too long, an abandoned car or an abandoned house is like, it was covered over with kudzu in very short order. And we don't have kudzu in California, but I thought I'd start off with it because it's kind of emblematic of some things that are often true about invasive species. So one is that it was actually intentionally introduced. So in the 1800s, it was brought in as an ornamental plant, and it was like seed packets of it were sold up through the 1950s or 1960s. And, the idea was like, it grows anywhere and it's so vigorous and like, you can have a vine in 10 minutes. And, that was seen as an advantage. I would really warn you that if you're looking through seed catalogs or plant catalogs and somebody says like, this will grow anywhere, tolerates terrible soil, you never have to water it, actually maybe just like step back a minute and say, maybe that's not something I actually want in my garden, because maybe that's what I'll be, pulling out every weekend for the rest of my life. So, kudzu is also kind of sanctioned by the US government as a cure-all for the topsoil loss that was occurring in farms, particularly in Alabama, Arkansas, and Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl. It was a good erosion preventer. It's kind of a bean-like species, so they were using it for cattle forage, like a cheap source of protein for cattle. So it's one of these things that like people had really good intentions in introducing it, and then and it didn't go wild right away. So it was kind of a lag time before people noticed what a problem it was, and then it's essentially now become ineradicable. And we probably won't get it in California because our climate is not wet enough for it. But you can see that it is, everywhere in the Southeast and a little bit in the Northwest. And, there's a lot of people studying how to stop it, or, there's kind of a monitoring program to kind of figure out where it's going. But there isn't a lot of hope really for kind of driving kudzu back, either eradicating it or even bringing it down to a point where it's not problematic anymore. So we kind of, I would say we sort of lost the battle against kudzu. So what I want to do now is turn a little bit more to California, and just in your mind, not necessarily in the chat, I want to see if you can spot a non-native species to California on this page. So we have here California poppies, house sparrows, honeybees, dandelions, gray squirrels, earthworms, ice plant, opossums, and garden snails. So just go over your mind if you can find a non-native species among those. And the answer to this is actually that they are all non-native, except for the California poppy. So California poppy is our state flower. That one's definitely from here, but all the rest of these have been introduced. And the point of this is not that these are bad species by any means, just that they're so common. Like practically everybody knows at least a few of these, or sees them in their backyard, or sees them in their lawn. They're everywhere, they're ubiquitous. And so non-native species have really penetrated our, ecosystems and our lives and our, our kind of our sense of like what the outdoors is about. And sometimes to such an extent that we don't even realize that they are non-native. Ice plant, which has been widely planted by Caltrans all over highways, and it's, on coastal bluffs throughout Northern California and the Central Coast. It even made it onto the sesquicentennial commemorative stamp for California that commemorated the 150th anniversary of statehood. So like when the Postal Service was trying to think of like, what would be the iconic image of California that would, like resonate with people and just say California and, statehood and its history, they showed a picture of an ecosystem that, did not look like this in 1850, because this plant was not here in 1850, and also that, just has been a terrible invader that people are working very hard to try to get rid of and restore native dune vegetation. So the California Native Plant Society, when this stamp came out, was very upset, big hissy fit. Unfortunately, the hissy fits of the lovely California Native Plant Society people are like nothing to the US Postal Service. So the stamp came out and was sold, and there it is. So kind of harking back to what I was saying a minute ago about, that these species, that although common, are not necessarily bad. In thinking about whether the presence of a non-native species is a problem or not, I like to divide it up as like, things occur on a spectrum. So there are species that are basically benign, they're not doing any harm, on a spectrum up to harmful. And then there's also kind of a naturalizing spectrum. So what I mean by naturalizing is that they're able to kind of reproduce and spread on their own. Like they don't need any help cultivating or being bred or being, mated or whatever in order to make offspring and to move into other areas. So naturalizing is that process. And so it's really the ones that I'm worried about as invasives are only the ones that are in the harmful and naturalizing combination. And I can think of like, species that are non-native that fit into the other three, categories. So like benign and also not naturalizing would be something like a lemon tree in your yard, right? You don't need to worry. There's no plague of lemons invading, our wildlands. And then honeybees are everywhere. They're definitely naturalizing. And although they often live in commercial hives, they also make swarms in people's, houses and in dead trees and so on. But they're generally benign or even, positive for people because they pollinate crops. And then there's, as an example of something that's harmful but not naturalizing, I think of something like a tiger escaped from the zoo. Like it definitely would not be a good idea to have, human-eating tigers running around our neighborhoods, but they're not going to reproduce, right? There's not going to be enough of them to make a spreading population of tigers in our area. So all the other three combinations are not bad, or at least are only temporarily bad. And the harmful naturalizing ones are the ones we worry about as invaders. So just to give a thought to biology and biological theory and Darwin's theory of evolution, in some ways, I know this kind of throws people, because isn't this just a little bit upside down? When you think about it, like, species are supposed to be most fit for their own environments, right? They're supposed to be the most fit things. They're the ones that have survived. So why would a species that had actually evolved in some other environment be better at our local environment than the things that evolved here? And that's just kind of a weird concept. It's actually a whole bunch of different explanations, some of which apply to different species, and none of them apply to all invasive species. But the one that I want to talk about, because it's the most common explanation and it's the one that's maybe easiest to grasp, and the one that maybe applies to the most species, is the idea of enemy release. So this is a picture of the cane toad, which is an invader in Australia. You may have heard of it. What we mean by enemy release is that the cane toad doesn't have any natural predators in Australia where it's been introduced. It has plenty of natural predators in its own environment, but in Asia. But when it was introduced, it was brought to a place where nothing wants to eat it. So there's no real check on its population. And the reason nothing wants to eat it is that it secretes a toxin in its skin that is basically deadly to a lot of predators. In its own environment, its own predators have evolved defenses to that toxin, and they've kind of gotten into a balance where the predators keep the toad in check, and the toad keeps trying to evade the predators with its toxin. When I got to Australia, nothing there has any protection against that skin toxin of the cane toad. And it was actually another one of these intentionally introduced species. It was actually introduced to be a control for a different introduced species. So the Australian farmers were growing sugarcane in Queensland, and they were having problems with an introduced beetle called the cane grub. It's actually the larval form of the beetle that chews on the sugarcane. So they thought, well, what we need is some kind of, reptile or amphibian or something that will eat this grub. And so they found the cane toad, which also lives in the sugarcane, lives in sugarcane. And they brought it in to be a biological control, like a natural enemy of the cane pest. Unfortunately, cane toads are extremely voracious in what they eat. So this is one eating a turtle. And the term for how they eat things is that they are gate limited. In other words, the only thing that limits what a cane toad will eat is how big its mouth is. Like, it literally, if it can get its mouth around something, that's food. So there's it eating a turtle. This is a cane toad eating a bat. And I'm just going to warn you, there's going to be just a little bit of animals eating animals here for a couple more slides. Nothing that you wouldn't see on a Good Nature documentary, but just FYI. So the cane toad was brought in, and then it ate native frogs, and it ate native snakes. It ate native bats. It ate native turtles. It ate native bugs. What it didn't eat a whole lot of was the cane grub. It actually was a pretty ineffective predator, because the grubs were generally farther up in the canopy of the cane than the cane toad itself was. And also they didn't seem to mesh very well with respect to their life cycles. So a complete failure. The introduction of the cane toad was a complete failure as a biological control agent for the pest. And now it is spreading everywhere. And so there's kind of like, people have been watching for decades as the kind of cane toad front has marched inexorably across tropical Australia. And unfortunately, there's a lot of concern. It's moving faster and faster. So initially, the speed of its movement was only about 10 to 15 kilometers per year. But as the populations have gotten bigger, it's actually trekking faster. And there's a lot of concern for this region, which is called the Kimberley, which is one of the most biologically interesting and endemic and unusual and diverse parts of Australia, and it's next on the cane toad's path. So people in Australia, I would say, are very aware of the cane toad problem, and people who love Australian wildlife are very animated against the cane toad, to the extent that there's and are particularly worried about the fate of this little animal, which is a native marsupial mammal called the northern quoll. This is an animal about sort of between maybe a mouse and a rabbit in size, but it's a carnivore. It eats meat. And it has no protection. If it will try to eat the toad, and it will die because it will be killed by the toxin. So the great Australian tradition of toad busting has arisen around this, and toad busting means that you go out into wildlands and you try to get rid of the toads. And I want to show you just a little bit of video from a documentary that was made in the 1980s about this phenomenon that shows you kind of the lengths to which some Australians are willing to go to bust toads.
The invasion is on, and I appeal to everybody to, wherever you see a toad, have no hesitation running over and killing the monster.
Well, I line them up with the driver's side front wheel, and it's not quite as easy as it used to be with the big fat tyres on the RX4 Mazda, but I seem to be able to get most of the ones I line up on the right-hand side of the road. Well, I really go out of my way to run over cane toads, basically because I have a very profound love of the wildlife that occurs here naturally.
So lots of other solutions besides running them over with a VW have been proposed. And one of the more innovative ones is that a researcher there has figured out that the toads emit a kind of a pheromone, like a sort of odoriferous compound, and that you can put this into a little tablet and drop it in the water, and it will attract the tadpoles. And the idea of it is just that you put this into a trap so that the tadpoles swim in and then they can't swim out, and then you can just remove them from a creek or a river or something. And so, this is like, it's a technological innovation, it's based on research, but it's still kind of reliant on people going out into wildlands and kind of hand eradicating gigantic numbers of species. So that's tough. I think that another front on which people are starting to work, but is maybe a little less popular, is to start thinking about how do we coexist instead? Like, can we actually just say, like, this is futile or it's not enough, so let's try to figure out a way to live with and next to these invaders. And that strategy is exemplified by this, which is the cane toad sausage. So these are sausages made from cane toads, of cane toad meat, that has been harvested, and they are so by people who are doing toad busting, and then they salt them with thiabendazole, which is a compound that induces nausea in most mammals. So the idea here is that they make the sausages and they throw them out into the wild areas where the cane toads haven't invaded yet, and the northern quolls, those little marsupial carnivores that I was talking about a minute ago, they will eat the sausages. They will get nauseated, but not dangerously so. They won't die, they'll just like feel bad. And they'll associate that bad feeling with the taste of cane toad. So the point here is to try to use the toad sausages to teach the northern quolls that cane toads are not good food. All right. So all of this to say, and we're going to go back to California in just a minute here, but all of this to say that, like, species can get way out of hand, and then it's this giant problem to try to figure out how to claw back from that. And one way might be to find innovative ways to remove them from the wild, and the other might be to find innovative ways to just sort of deal with their presence in the wild. And we'll think about both of those as we move on to talking about California. So back to the Golden State, where some of our beautiful golden wildlife is non-native. So this is the species I got my start with, Scotch broom. And in spring, I mean, it's absolutely lovely. And sometimes I have a hard time saying to people, like, you see all that? We don't here. And I'll also say that when I was first getting my start in restoration, I went out to Angel Island with one of these work days that I'm going to talk to you about at the end, and my then boyfriend, who's now my husband. And we were, it was like they were having encroachment of non-native or non-local pines around an oak. And so we were cutting down these pines that were kind of smothering this big oak tree. And then when we got to the bottom, the oak tree was just surrounded by poison oak. And my husband was like, let me get this straight. So we came out here with axes and we worked in the hot sun all day to cut down pines so that poison oak could just take me through this one more time. And it was like, explain it to me just one more time because I'm not getting it. And so, some of our invasive plant issues and our invasive animal issues are complicated by the fact that people have a love for them, or they have they're not really sure that the effort is right or worthwhile or, well placed to try to remove them from wildlands. So there are some that are exceptionally problematic species, and they often cause economic damage. So, for my money, the thing that we should be doing is focusing especially on those ones that have these really, really negative impacts, either economic impacts or impacts on threatened species. Zebra mussels and quagga mussels, which are very closely related, are aquatic invertebrates that have just made it to California recently. In other states, like in the Great Lakes region, they have caused immense amounts of economic harm in dollars because these are basically fouling organisms. They cling to any hard surface. So what I'm showing you here is zebra mussels on like inside pipes. They're on other animals. They're on junk that was found at the bottom of a river. They're on the propellers of boats. And the main economic damage that they do is that they clog water intake pipes. So they will just kind of grow on each other until they clog up a pipe. You may have noticed that a lot of California is plumbed for irrigation, right? We're moving water around all over the state. We are really, really hopeful that we don't get zebra mussels into our, delta pipes and elsewhere into the water infrastructure. Here's another really baddie. You've probably seen this one. This is a rangeland pest called yellow star thistle, and those wicked spines on the side of it are the reason why it's really troublesome. It's very hard to move through a yellow star thistle infested pasture. Cattle can eat it when it's very small, but it's entirely toxic to horses, and nothing will eat it once those spines grow out. It's also kind of green in the summertime when nothing else is growing, but that means that it's drawing water out of the soil. And that dries out our grasslands. It makes them more fire prone. It's competing for water with native plants. I will say that, like many invasive species, there's at least one constituency that likes it, and that's beekeepers. Because in the late summer, it makes great honey, and in the late summer, it's pretty much the only flower that has nectar naturally in California wildlands. So you can, people will put their bee boxes out in an infested pasture in order to benefit from that. You may know this fellow from the pet trade. These are red-eared sliders. They've been introduced because people get tired of their pet and they dump them out into the pond. They don't want to get rid of them, and so they put them into the wild. And they are vectors of disease, and they're also out competing for food our western pond turtle, which is likely to be on the endangered species list in some areas before too long. This little insect that I'm showing you two pictures or two examples of on top of the penny is called the gold-spotted oak borer, and down south in Southern California, it is just killing oak woodlands like crazy. There's no way to stop it. We're hoping that it's not going to make it too much farther north. There aren't a ton of oak woodlands down in Southern California, but we have, I don't know, something between like around 10% of the state in the north is in oak woodlands, and we really don't want to see the gold-spotted oak borer up here. I've been working on a species called Phragmites, which impedes navigation, and it kind of takes out the sightlines and the open water habitats in marshes here in the Bay, and also way up in San Pablo Bay and in Sassoon Marsh. My project is up in Sassoon. And up on the north coast around Humboldt, there's a European beach grass, which stabilizes dunes. And this is another one that was introduced here intentionally because dune stabilization was seen as a good thing. And so the question of whether it's a good idea or a bad idea to stabilize dunes probably depends on where your house is. So if your house is built really close, maybe you want those dunes to stay put. so that your erosion and wave action doesn't come and knock it down. And that's indeed why European beach grass was introduced. But if you want native dune vegetation and all of the species that depend on it, they're adapted to a constantly shifting, windy, sand moving, unstable ecosystem. And once the beach grass comes in, that all goes away, and we don't have that much open sand. And if you're a bird lover, the threatened snowy plover is a species that needs to nest right on the bare sand, and it can't tolerate these kind of dense patches of thick grass that hide predators and take away nesting areas. So, whether you like it or not really depends on maybe your economic interest or your interest in biodiversity. And on that note, I'll just say that a lot of San Francisco used to be sand dunes, including everything that is Golden Gate Park. And this is a view from the 1890s of the Richmond sand dunes, which of course we now just call the Richmond. I mean, all of that neighborhood was built on sand dune, and all of Golden Gate Park used to be sand dunes. So we're probably not going to be bringing that back anytime soon. There is just a little smidgen of restoration in the Presidio that's going on. And they are, to my mind, this is a little bit of a kind of a dune museum, because and it illustrates what I want to say about the controversy and people's views of invasive species, that this is the part they've opened up for native dune plants, but it's not really getting any wind exposure like it needs to stay vital. And the reason for that is that people don't want to take down those Monterey cypresses that the Presidio is known for. The neighbors have a view shed that includes those trees. And there's certainly a lot of people would say, how dare you environmentalists take down a tree, right? So it's controversial. And if you want to get polarizing in the Bay Area about non-native trees, just mention eucalyptus, and that's like, throwing a Molotov cocktail into the conversation. And speaking of Molotov cocktails, they're actually super, super flammable. So this is why they're controversial. I don't mean to joke. I mean, the Oakland Hills is the example here I have on the screen, and I absolutely don't want to joke about that. This was a fire that occurred in the wildland urban interface. We're starting to understand better that term, the WUI, wildland urban interface, because we have planted a lot of dense vegetation very close to our homes, and when they burn, it's catastrophic. But people put a lot of the blame for the damage done by that fire, not only on the density, but on the fact that the trees themselves were often eucalypts. And the eucalyptus, is known for having a lot of volatile oils in it, and it's extremely flammable. You can kind of see from this picture, having all this shreddy bark, I mean, that's just a tree that wants to burn. All right. In fact, it's adapted, its evolutionary role is to burn. So it's controversial, partly because some people love them, right? They think of the eucalyptus in the Bay Area as being part and parcel of what makes this a great place to live, or what makes it a unique place. And people love them. They love the smell, they love the look. It's hard to tell, people that they're terrible when they believe they're wonderful. And there's also some scientific controversy about how invasive they are. So it's certainly true that in certain places they're adding more flammability than the native ecosystem has, and it's not meant to burn at that frequency or intensity. But there is some doubt about whether the eucalypt that's called blue gum in particular is actually a spreading or naturalizing species. It might just be, a harmful species in its own place. I'm going to briefly tell you about a little bit of my research, because it involved something of a stakeholder controversy of this kind, a much narrower one. So I worked on this species called slender false brome, which is a grass species that invades in the redwood understory in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And if you think, just like without looking at these pictures, if you think about what a redwood forest looks like when you walk through it, I think you would probably imagine a lot of big trees and then not that much on the ground. Like there's not a whole lot of greenery underfoot. It's very much a thick layer of duff and, maybe the odd trillium here and there. But slender false brome has this ability to, as a grass, to colonize a very dark, deep redwood forest area, as well as sunny spots. And it's a species that is not very widespread in California. The main place that it infests is in Oregon. And it has been spread around Oregon mostly by logging trucks, where they log in the forest, and then the seeds are carried on the tracks or the tires of the trucks. And then in the short range, just by seed spreading around by animals. And so it's not super widespread. It has been designated a noxious weed in 3 states. And the main reason that people are worried about it, in fact, besides it's being non-native, is that wildlife and livestock don't eat it. So it has no real habitat value. And there's some, suspicion that it's suppressing other herbs and baby trees in the understory because of it's thirstier for water than those other species. Now, in our area, it's limited to areas right around the Thornwood Preserve, which belongs to the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. And then it was probably introduced there in a horse van that came down from Oregon, spread around. It's probable that Mid-Pen inadvertently spread it a little bit themselves before they realized what was going on their own, like their shovels or shoes. So the little, creekside down 84 and the parts that are kind of dispersed away from that central area are probably due to spread that happened before they realized what was going on. But it's still so contained that there's a thought that this one we might be able to actually eradicate, that we don't have to throw in the towel on this species. So the Mid-Pen, along with the San Mateo RCD, so resource conservation districts, are organizations that kind of do stewardship, but in consultation and collaboration with private landowners. So they help private landowners do stewardship on their own lands that can't be done, that would otherwise be done on public lands. And they put out a control program where they used herbicides, and they also did some hand pulling, and they paid money to private property owners whose lands were right around the Thornwood district or the preserve to get rid of slender false brome on their own land. But not everybody was cool with using herbicides on their property for good reason. So Mid-Pen had no authority to make people use herbicides, and the hand pulling kind of wasn't working fast enough. So what we did at Santa Clara is we did an experiment to see if mulching would be a good non-herbicidal method to use on these adjacent homeowners' properties. So what you see here are the 3 kinds of mulch we tested: black plastic, weed-free hay, so just kind of smothering it with these thick materials on top, and wood chips. And I would normally show you graphics of statistical results, but the pictures actually tell the story really pretty well too. So what you see in the back is a place that we didn't mow or mulch. And then just in front of that is a place where we mowed, but we didn't mulch. And there's pretty much an unbroken canopy of slender false brome. And then the front is the hay mulch. And you can see how well in that square of hay mulch that there aren't any little slender false bromes poking up through it. So it's doing a really effective job of smothering the green grass there, which is what we want. And then here are some pictures of the wood chips and the black plastic mulches. So we've pulled back the black plastic so you can see how well it suppressed slender false brome. The wood chips are on the right. Basically, all of these mulches worked really well to suppress it. So then the question became, which mulch should we use, since they all work pretty well? And the questions came down to things like, well, the very best one at getting rid of the slender false brome was actually the black plastic, and the hay was not quite as good. But the black plastic was really bad. It got rid of everything. So it was like a wasteland, just like nuked the whole understory. So the hay and the wood chips were best for preserving some of the native flora. Wood chips lasted the longest, and hay didn't last as long. But the black plastic was the cheapest, where the wood chips were the most expensive, but everybody liked the wood chips looks better. So, it kind of comes down to the choice of the people of how to deal with this invader, whether what they want to be looking at is slender false brome or a bunch of black plastic or a nice thick layer of wood chips. For my money, I vote for the beautiful, durable, but somewhat expensive wood chip approach. So with that, I want to talk about a few notable Bay Area invaders that you might see in various places. So, Scotch and French broom I've mentioned, ice plant I've mentioned, yellow star thistle I've mentioned. Pepperweed, this one on the bottom left, or white top is something you might see in the salt marshes. Cape ivy, fennel, and medusa head in grasslands or kind of disturbed areas. And then we have some invasive animals as well. These are probably all here to stay, honestly, but it is a good idea if you recognize them in a place that is sensitive to maybe report to the the park ranger or the authorities that you've seen them there. And it might be a new, although they're not new to California, it might be new for that particular place, and you might be doing a good thing just to spot them and let someone know, an authority who might be interested in the fact that they have arrived. And then the final pitch that I'll make is that this is something you actually can help with on the weekend, and it's a great activity for kids. So these kids are out doing some native plant planting and invasive plant removal. And I have a couple of, actually, I'll just ask Megan to drop the links in the chat. So I would say every weekend of the year, if you wanted to go out and yank wildland invaders out, you could do it. It's especially prevalent in the spring when everybody likes to get outside, but there's a place for you pretty much any Saturday or Sunday that you want to in the Bay Area. So a couple of examples: the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, those parks have had a habitat restoration team going for a long time. These are volunteers removing ice plant. The Golden Gate Audubon Society organizes habitat restoration and invasive plant removal days all over the Bay Area at various places. East Bay Regional Parks, this is just an example from Reinhardt Redwood, but Sibley Volcanic and several other of the parks in the East Bay District will take people, and you don't need any experience. All you need is a water bottle and some sunscreen and a hat, and they will provide you, usually the gloves and the tools and all the instruction that you need to do it. Right around here, the Santa Clara Valley chapter of the California Native Plant Society runs the Edgewood Weed Warriors. So Edgewood is a super cool place. It's got really, really high conservation and habitat value, and protecting it involves doing some weekly work on non-native species. So I encourage you to go up there. And then Grassroots Ecology is an organization that contracts with various public and private landowners in the region to run these. They have internships and they also have work days and so on. So highly recommend that you check them out. And then my last pitch will be, if you are a gardener, to take care with what you put in your landscaping, because so many of our invasive plants have been introduced as ornamentals. And the California Invasive Plant Council has a terrific program where they partner with nurseries to supply these brochures. First, they try to encourage nurseries not to sell plants that are known to be invaders. And they often get good response from kind of the mom and pop nurseries, not so much from the Home Depots and the Ace Hardwares. But I would say that in addition to that, we all have a responsibility to kind of know that our wildlands are affected by these species, and to not make the problem worse by spreading them in our own gardens. So you can pick up these brochures at the there's another link in the chat for that, the California Invasive Plant Council website, and it will just tell you some good alternatives for things that you can plant that are either similar looking or kind of similar functionally, that will not be likely to wreak havoc in our wonderful natural environments. So with that, I will finish off and say thank you very much for your attention, and I am pleased to be able to answer any questions that you have.